So it is my pleasure and honor on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Freedom from Religion Foundation to bestow this year's Henry Zumach Freedom from Religious Fundamentalism Award to an organization that has represented a population uniquely targeted by the religious right and by Christian nationalists. The Zumach Award was created in 2017 by our ultra-generous Wisconsin member and activist, Hank Zumach. It's grown from its initial $100,000 endowment to over $1 million today. FFRF gives out 5% of the fruits of this endowment every year to reward and acknowledge major activism against religious intolerance and bigotry. This year's recipient is the Human Rights Campaign, the HRC, which is our nation's largest organization leading the fight for LGBTQ+ rights. Here to accept the award today on behalf of the Human Rights Campaign is Brandon Wolf, currently serving as the National Press Secretary for the HRC. Brandon is a nationally recognized advocate for LGBTQ+ civil rights and also gun safety laws. Brandon is a survivor of the 2016 Orlando Pulse Nightclub. He was the first survivor of the Pulse tragedy to testify before Congress and returned in 2022 to testify before the House Oversight Committee on the rise of anti-LGBT hate violence. His debut memoir, A Place for Us, was released last year and became an instant bestseller. We have copies right over there on the table today. Brandon will be signing copies of this during our break at 3 o'clock. Now I'd like to present Brandon with a plaque that he will keep and a $50,000 check on behalf of the HRC for the vital work that it does. So please welcome Brandon Wolf.
Thank you.
For all you do. You hold that and I'll hold the check.
Okay. Well, thank you to Todd. Thank you to FFRF for the incredible honor. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your belief that a better world is possible. As mentioned, my name is Brandon Wolf. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm so proud to serve as National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign, our country's largest LGBTQ+ civil rights organization. And I do, again, want to, on behalf of myself and my colleagues at HRC, express my deep gratitude for what is truly an incredible honor and a reflection of the power of the work that LGBTQ+ people are doing every single day to fight for a better country. It's not lost on me that there is a common thread that's running through all of this today. This organization, the reason you're in the seats, the name of this award, the work of HRC, the thing that we're all drawn to here in this moment is at its core a fight for freedom. But not the kind of freedom that you might see from the religious right, the hollow slogan that's been hijacked and slapped on a bumper sticker somewhere. We're here because we believe in real freedom, a freedom that every single person deserves by virtue of simply being a human being on this planet. You see, I believe we all deserve the freedom to live, the freedom to love, the freedom, yes, to be, simply because we're here. And I have to say, from a personal place, you heard a little bit of my story, but it was ultimately that fight for freedom that brought me to not just HRC, but the work, the movement in general. You see, I did not have grand dreams of stages like this or accepting awards like these. I did not envision that I would ever play a part in trying to change the world, because for most of my life, I didn't know that there was a place in the world for me at all. I grew up a young, queer, black kid in rural Oregon in a Seventh-day Adventist household, desperately wishing that I could feel normal, desperately wishing that there was a place for me to belong in the world. I wanted to experience freedom, the freedom to be me unapologetically and authentically without having to be afraid of what might be lurking around the corner. Now, for a lot of people, I think the town I grew up in can feel very familiar. And many of you may know a town just like it. It's the kind of town where if you went out and counted every head of livestock, you'd probably find more cows than people. It's the kind of town where if you went out and counted the stoplights, they would probably fit on one hand. It's the kind of town where, I am not joking you, when Starbucks opened, they closed school for multiple days so that we could get a latte and take a picture with it. And so you know that in these towns there is a sense of familiarity. There's, families who've known each other for generations. They're the same people that you went to kindergarten with, or the people that you graduate high school with. And for a lot of people, towns like that can feel like home. They can feel comforting in a way. But it wasn't quite that simple for people like me. Because as you might imagine, in that little rural town in Oregon, around my little Seventh-day Adventist dinner table, there were not a lot of people that looked like me. And there were certainly not a lot of people who understood what it was like to love like me. So I did all of the things that people told me I had to do in order to belong in this world, in order to assimilate into that culture. I did every after-school activity imaginable. I got straight A's all the way through school. I held down a part-time job. I did music and theater and sports. I ran for student body office every year I was in high school. I won student body office, by the way, every year I was in high school. But that's beside the point. I overachieved because I think at my core I wanted to believe that if I did enough, if I excelled enough, if I proved it enough, that maybe when I was finally honest about who I was, when I finally came out, that small town would forgive me. It's just not that simple, though, for people that look and love like us. I graduated high school and went off to college, and I thought that's where everything gets easy. If high school is hard, college is a breeze. Everybody finds their way in school. But perhaps unsurprisingly, when you go to a state school a couple of hours from where you graduated high school, things feel a lot like high school. The same kid who was shooting spitwads at me in science class was there in my science lecture hall. The same kid I would run away from in the cafeteria was there eating lunch in the college cafeteria instead. When I graduated high school, there were nearly 2,000 students in our school, and of those 2,000 students, only 11 were black. And when I got to college, it wasn't much more diverse than that. I remember thinking at that time, people had told me the world was never going to be ready for someone like me. I was always going to have to find a way to shave down the edges of who I was to fit the mold, the box that I'd been assigned, and I started to internalize that. I wondered if it never got any better than that for me. I was working at Starbucks at the time, and I remember sitting in the back room of my off-campus store, and I was wearing this apron that smelled like rotting milk because I didn't have enough money to put quarters in the washing machine at home. I was eating a bagel that I'd found on the bottom of the refrigerator at work because I didn't have enough money to put food in the cupboards, and I wondered, is this the best it gets? Do I never get to be free? Do I never get to be me in a place that can handle all of what that means? And whether you believe in fate or coincidence or whatever, at that very moment, my shift supervisor came bounding in the back room, and she's holding a copy of the school newspaper, and she's like, "Oh, I thought of you immediately when I saw this." Now, if you knew me back then, you know that I thought right away someone had gone to jail or something like that. But there on the page was an ad, and it said, "Help Wanted, Walt Disney World." And it's like a light bulb went off. I was like, if there's anywhere on earth I can be really gay, it's got to be Walt Disney World. It turns out I was right about that. So I did what any good college student does. I called my grandmother and I said, "I have this great idea, Grandma. I'm going to drop out of college and I'm going to be famous working at Walt Disney World." And she, like any good grandma, said, "How much do you need and when do you leave?" I auditioned for a contract, got called for a job. In a couple of weeks, I was packing 2 suitcases and moving 3,000 miles away. I also remember telling my dad that I was leaving. And as you might imagine, dads are not grandmas, and the reaction is not the same. And I told him, "Dad, I'm going to drop out of college, and I'm going to go work at Walt Disney World." And he's like, "Have you ever been to Florida before?" But I'm like, "No, Disney and gay, I can do those things." So I did. I took a leap of faith. I was going in search of something different, of a place where I thought maybe I could be free for the first time, and lo and behold, I stumbled into it. People had told me my entire life that the world was never going to be ready for someone like me, and yet I stumbled into this world that felt like it had been designed for me from the beginning. I found a sense of normal and belonging and safety, and yes, freedom in foods I'd never tried before, in languages I'd never heard before, in cultures I'd never gotten the privilege to experience before. I found a sense of safety and belonging and normal and yes, freedom in chosen family. A phrase I didn't really understand before that moment. It's kind of like when people tell me there's a new Taylor Swift album, and I nod my head like I know what you're talking about, but I'm going to Google it later. That's how I felt about chosen family. I thought I understood the concept, but you don't get it until you're sitting in the room with it. I met my best friend Drew in 2014, and he changed my life forever. We met on a blind date, well, sort of a half-blind date, because like any good millennial gay man, I had thoroughly Instagram stalked him beforehand. And as I was scrolling through his feed, I'm like picking out names for our children, deciding who would take whose last name, all of the priorities when you see your future husband on Instagram. And I noticed that I had a mutual friend who was liking all of his pictures, so I said, I need another leap of faith in this moment. I reached out to our mutual friend and I said, I see you also know my future husband, Drew. I wonder if you could set me up on a date with him. He said yes. We got to date day, and I was nervous because it might come as a surprise to folks, but I am very naturally an introverted person, so it takes me a lot to work up to the one-on-one small talk, especially when there's an attractive future husband across the table. So I have to do the working myself up hype talk. So you can imagine I'm in my bedroom, I'm staring at the full-length mirror, and I'm like, okay, he's going to ask you what your favorite food is. The answer is Mexican food. He's going to ask you what your favorite color is. The answer is green. And I put on my lucky underwear knowing absolutely no one would see them but me, and I bolted out the door. I get to the P.F. Chang's at Millennium Mall, a very classy first date establishment. I parked just far enough away so that if I had an embarrassing episode, I could sprint for the car. He'd never know what I drove, and I would never see him again. And I get to the restaurant. I can see through the doors. He's sitting on the bench, and he looks exactly like his Instagram pictures, which, of course, makes me more nervous than I was before. So I pull open the door. I sit down next to him. There was a wait for our table, so he'd ordered us a round of drinks, and he's holding this big martini glass, and he says, "I have a question for you, Brandon." And I said, "Well, Drew, I have been preparing for this literally all day, so hit me with your best shot." He says, "I wonder what your thoughts are on the for-profit healthcare industry in America and its impact on consumers." I swear I almost blurted out green because that's what I'd practiced so much. But I had a couple sips of this liquid courage, and so I told him how criminal I think our for-profit healthcare industry is in America and the devastation it has caused to so many people. And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Oh, I work for a for-profit health insurance company, so I just wasn't sure how awkward this date could get." What is a funny story now was honestly profound in the moment because That one question about something I believe turned into an entire night of talking about what makes us us. We talked about music and movies, the things we like, the things we don't like. We talked about old flings, and never once, in the middle of this crowded restaurant, never once did Drew lower his voice to make sure that the booth behind us didn't hear us talking about boys instead of girls. Never once did he deepen the gravel in his throat or stiffen his wrist to avoid detection. It's like all these people who had told me the world was never going to be ready for someone like me, and yet there was this man in front of me who, with his very presence, was declaring that the world had better get ready because we were already there. It was profound, and I wanted to understand more of it. So we became attached at the hip. And when he met his partner Juan in 2015, we expanded to the Three Musketeers. We did everything together. We traveled together. We loved New Year's Eve. It gave us a chance to twirl under disco balls and promise to live life more fully in the future. I guess what I'm describing to you is that I found normal. The kind of normal that I didn't think people like us ever get the chance to experience. I found freedom. That young, queer, black kid sitting at his profoundly Seventh-day Adventist table was suddenly free to be unapologetically, authentically, audaciously. It was normal. We often refer to June 11th of 2016 in Orlando as the last normal day. And everything about it was normal. It was Saturday, laundry day. I was folding socks and underwear on the couch. Drew and Juan were on a date at SeaWorld. It was summer, so I fell asleep in a lounge chair by the pool. And when the sun dipped below the horizon, I did the most normal thing. I texted my best friends, and I asked if they wanted to go and get a drink. They got to my place just before midnight, and everything about it was normal. We listened to the same playlist we always listened to. We watched the same music videos we always watched. I was almost never allowed to have control of the cocktail shaker because I make drinks like 3 times as strong as they're supposed to be. I'm the fun friend, okay? But I think Drew could see that I'd had a rough week, so he relinquished control of the shaker, and he would just grimace at me from across the room when he took a sip. When it came time to decide where to go, we did the most normal thing. We picked a place we'd been to dozens, if not hundreds of times before. You see, Pulse Nightclub was a safe space for people like us. If I found normal and safety and freedom in community, I also found it on the dance floor at Pulse. It's one of the first places I ever held hands with someone I had a crush on without looking over my shoulder first. It's one of the first places I wore a suit as skinny as this one without being afraid of what someone might call me, or wore booty shorts as high as could be without being afraid of what someone would do. Because it was a place where I could be me. And it was that for so many. Everything about it was normal that night. From the long line outside to the same drinks we always ordered to the beats radiating through the dance floor. We had a spot on the patio underneath the stars, and Drew, who had a master's degree in clinical psychology, when he had a few drinks, would offer you a free therapy session, whether you actually wanted that or not. That night, his therapy session was about friendship and love. He was visibly frustrated that we so often let the little things get in the way of how much we care about each other. He couldn't understand why we let our differences tear us apart instead of focusing on our similarities. And when he was coming in for a landing on his point, he would drape a long, gangly arm over your shoulders. I think he might have been holding himself up after one too many, but it was endearing nonetheless. That night, he draped his arm over my shoulder, and he pulled me in tight, and he said, "You know, I guess what I'm saying, Brandon, is I wish we said I love you more often." The most normal of conversations in the most normal of places became the extraordinary tragedy that rocked the world almost in an instant. It was just after 2 o'clock in the morning that I was washing my hands at a bathroom sink. I can remember this cup sitting on the edge of the sink looking like it might fall off. I can remember the poster on the wall above the urinal. I can remember how cold the water was from the faucet that night, and I will never forget the first sound of gunshots. The sense of fear and panic, the debate with people in the bathroom about whether to run or hide. I remember sprinting for an exit, wishing I got a chance to say goodbye to my grandparents. I remember telling myself not to look left into the dance floor, willing myself to head for the sliver of light in the back of the room. I'm so lucky that I made it to that sliver of light, that I burst out onto the sidewalk, the night air rushing into my face. Too many people were not that lucky that night. In the early hours of June 12, 2016, a gunman charged through the front doors of my safe space, a place I had found safety and freedom, and he opened fire. He used an assault weapon to kill 49 people, most of them LGBTQ+ people of color, and injure 53 others. Drew and Juan, my chosen family, my brothers, were in very normal fashion wrapped in each other's arms underneath their favorite disco ball, right in that man's line of fire. They never got the chance to come home and say goodbye. I wish that I could tell you that I got up the next day and started fighting for a different kind of world, but the truth is, I wasn't sure that the next day was worth waking up to see at all. I spent days with my head under the covers wishing that the nightmare would be over, but it never went away. And so I found courage in community. I found it in the same place that I'd found it when I packed those bags and moved 3,000 miles away, in the friendly embrace of a neighbor, in the smile of someone that I didn't know in line at the grocery store. And as time passed, I came to understand my place in all of this. It wasn't good enough anymore just to live that little slice of normal, to hold on to that little bit of freedom that I had uncovered. It was my job, my obligation, my duty to ensure that other people got a chance to experience that normal and freedom too. I knew that if the people that were stolen from us that night were going to matter, if they were going to carry on the legacy of the joy and laughter they brought into the world, then we were going to have to fight for a better world in their honor. A world where every kid, just like me, sitting around that staunchly Seventh-day Adventist dinner table knows that there is a world out there for them. That there is a place where they can be unapologetically, authentically, and audaciously. And so that's where our paths intertwine. That's what brought me to the Human Rights Campaign. It's why you ended up in these seats today, because we understand that freedom is not an accident. Freedom is not happenstance. Freedom is our job. Freedom is our work to do every single day. We are at an inflection point in history. We are facing a crossroads, and my challenge is we have to decide what kind of future we want and what that future is worth to us. We have to ask ourselves whether or not it is worth showing up every single day, every hour of that day, boldly and unapologetically to demand better than someone's regressive idea of who we should be. We can have a white nationalist Christian dictatorship or leaders who respect our constitutional freedoms. But we have to make that choice actively. We have to show up for the kind of future we want. We can have a country held down by someone's regressive idea that there's only one right way to be a human being, or only one right pew to sit in on one right day. A country captained by groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom or the Heritage Foundation, who have promised to wield power as a weapon against anyone who dissents. We can have that country. Or we can have a country with a daring vision that it is our diversity that is our strength, that our differing perspectives are our greatest asset, and that our freedoms should not be contingent upon conformity. We can have that world if we choose to show up for it. We can have the future we deserve. But it's not going to happen by accident. Democracy is not a one-day holiday. It's a 365-day a year, 24-hour-a-day project that requires every single one of us on the front lines. 6 days after the shooting at Pulse, we had a funeral service for Drew. It was the hardest day of my life. His mom asked me to be a pallbearer that day, and it was an honor I was incredibly grateful for. As I was helping to push his casket down the aisle at the funeral, I found myself holding on to the side really tightly because I did not want to let go of my best friend until I'd found the right words to say goodbye. When we got to the front of the room, I looked down at his casket and I made him a promise that changed my life. I promised him that I would never stop fighting for a world that he would be proud of. But you see, that promise was never really about Drew. It was never really about me either. Because a world that Drew would be proud of is a world every single one of us can be proud of. It's a world where young people know they are valued exactly as they are. It's a world where families are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. It's a world where every single one of us is free without exception. That's the world we deserve, and it's right in front of us. The question is, what are we willing to do in order to achieve it? We can have that world if we're willing to roll up our sleeves and work for it. We can have that world if we're willing to have tough conversations across dinner tables with people who may not agree with us on almost anything. We can have that world if we then turn those conversations into actions, if we knock on our neighbors' doors, if we pick up the phone to have more dialogues. We can have that world if we are willing to get involved in building it together. Yes, that means showing up at the ballot box in November, but guess what? It means showing up again at the school board meeting. It means showing up again at the state legislative hearing. It means showing up again at the PTA meeting. It means showing up again and again and again every day until that future is in front of us. That's what it takes to build the kind of future we deserve. So I will end where I began, which is with some gratitude. I want to thank you for showing up. Thank you for showing up in this room today. Thank you for believing in each other and the community you've been able to build together. Thank you for believing in us at the Human Rights Campaign and the work we do every single day to build a better future for all of us. Thank you for this incredible honor, but I have to tell you, for me, it's just a reminder of why I'm in this work in the first place. For me, it's a reminder of what's possible when we win. For me, it is just another call to action. Because I believe that the world that Drew would be proud of, the world all of us can be proud of, the world we deserve, I believe that freedom is worth fighting for. And I know this to be true. Every single time we fight, we win. Thank you all. I appreciate it.